if you look at waves of immigration, because my dad was of the wave of immigration, and when I say wave, because some of us will debate how many waves came, because yeah, Filipinos have been here since the 1700s, and they were on the Manila galleons, and then they landed and they jumped ship and they landed in New Orleans. So there's a little piece of history there, but for me, immigration is the technical arrangement or agreement to allow people to come in. And in the case of Filipinos, there's this whole bitter, terrible history about how the U.S. colonized the Philippines. And so some of us learned that history in the 1970s when martial law was declared. And what we learned was it wasn't an easy task, or it wasn't an easy campaign to suppress the Filipinos. We had won the revolution against Spain. We had already created what we consider our flag in the Philippines, our republic. We had a president, and then it was an interesting political set of circumstances where our sovereignty was severed. Our sovereignty was given up, and then the development in the Philippines was then layered with, now you're our colonial subjects. So my dad came at a time when the status was nationals. But when you come into the United States, and if you had a chance to look at the timeline, it's at the time of the Depression. It's at the time when blacks were still being hung in the South. Jim Crow was still a way of keeping blacks in their place. Emancipation Proclamation, oh, okay, so there's legislation, but then there's how do people get treated. And the whole question of affirmative action, like a lot of people have benefited, quote unquote, from the historical shifts that, oh, you're a person of color? Okay, yeah, you're equal. But people don't know the history of what it took. And in the case of Filipinos, that poster, positively no Filipinos allowed, when people see that now, they go, when did that happen? 90 years ago. I'm Terry Bautista, and I was born in the Philippines. I came over in 1947, and I've lived in Oakland since then. I went to 12 years of Catholic school. My dad worked in a restaurant, and then my mom did housekeeping, and eventually she became a dental technologist and owned a dental lab. But I had a pretty stable education. I'm the oldest of 4, and we all went to Catholic school. After high school, I went to 1 year San Francisco State. And then after that, I moved out of the house and became an independent teenager, and ended up at a junior college where it was a very interesting experience because the Black Panthers were there. It was a very tumultuous period because the draft was being protested, the war was being protested. There's a lot of things going on around in Oakland and the Bay Area. It was also a time when they had the third world strikes at San Francisco State and UC Berkeley. So it was just, all I remember is protest and things that were going on, marches and all of that. So I was kind of in that midst. And then I met a man who was a draft dodger, and he eventually became my partner, and we had children. But what was, I guess, the turning point was in 1972. Not only was I working on this project for the Filipino community, but martial law was declared in the Philippines. And that brought on a whole other chapter of working against the situation that kind of gripped the whole country. And it created a very polarized situation in the Philippine community. because you were either for Marcos or against Marcos. You were either anti-martial law or, oh, it's okay, you know. So for many years, almost 16 years, because this is also the same time I had that job where I trained teachers and went to schools to kind of put out fires between kids who were fighting with each other and being, there was a lot of ethnic division. So I found myself in a pretty good job, but at the same time there was all these issues in the Filipino community. So not only was martial law was an issue, but bilingual education was an issue, and youth development here where we're sitting right now, and even the cultural center where we might be able to go later, all of this was redevelopment. So we started running into senior Filipinos or in Chinatown who were losing their homes. And so there was another issue to deal with because it was also the same time as the International Hotel. And so some of our work was to help the seniors who were living here and losing their single rooms. So I just found myself shortly after college just involved in so many community projects, whether it was housing, whether it was senior services, whether it was youth development, whether it was bilingual education. There was just so much to get involved in. And then at the same time, in terms of global world issues, there's martial law, there's the draft and the war in Vietnam. It was just so busy with things to do and get involved in that I just kind of got involved. So when I did graduate, I actually got a BA in Humanities, and I got a minority scholarship in education, so I thought I was going to go into teaching. I went to 12 years of Catholic school, and I thought I was going to be a nun. I wanted to be a nun when I was in 3rd grade. And then in high school I realized, oh, all my teachers are nuns. Actually, I want to be a teacher. So one of my goals, I guess, if I had one, was to go into teaching. And so when I graduated in 1972, and that's that time period, you know, where in martial law, I'm running a youth employment program in Chinatown. People are discovering, you know, what it meant to be Filipino. We were teaching Philippine history. We were teaching Filipino-American experience. So I actually ended up not going into teaching, and I was hired at Asian American Studies at the end of the summer, which was also the same time martial law was declared at the end of the summer. And so it was, again, I was describing how you had to get involved, you know. So I ended up being hired as a teaching assistant in Asian American Studies, and I taught the section on community organizing. And so what that led to was bringing students off campus and working with the seniors who were losing their housing here in Chinatown, right where we're sitting now. And we actually built a hotel, and teenagers, students from Laney College, we did it on nothing, just volunteerism, fundraising on our own. We had no capital or capital campaign, sheer volunteerism. And so we built a hotel a few blocks away from City Hall, not far from here. And we did a lot of projects that had to do with youth and seniors and leadership and just kind of building the foundation for some of these agencies like the Filipinos for Affirmative Action that I mentioned. So that was going on from 72, then in 73 I worked in Oakland Public Schools, and I already mentioned how I had to work with teachers. And it was, again, bringing the information that you saw on the posters at Cafe Gabriela, bringing this information to teachers so that they could at least have a sensitivity and the ability to understand, oh, these kids are coming from the Philippines, but these kids are born here, and what does it mean to have them in the same classroom? And no, they're not Mexican, no, they're not just Spanish speaking, but they're a different group. So I actually had a good opportunity to continue doing community work, but it had something to do with what I was doing on campus. And it was at a time when so many things were happening that academia and community had to be connected. So from there, I worked at Oakland Public Schools for 5 years, and then I had children. I was no longer involved in the anti-Marcos political work, but I found myself in more jobs that had to do with community. I got it because of my, I actually went back and got my teaching credential. There was a big state initiative called Proposition 13. And Proposition 13 changed the foundation for how schools and education were funded. So I was in a pretty good job and a good department that was doing multi-ethnic education, and then within weeks of this legislation passing in California, our whole office got wiped out. So I found myself in a Filipino class with about 40 students, and the idea that Filipinos all speak good English, was totally smashed, because the Filipinos that were in this ESL class were from the provinces, were from the cities that were around the U.S. bases. So again, to me, the history of how did the U.S. and the Philippines, come together? What was the relationship? And then the whole question of history came up again, because these particular Filipinos were not well educated, did not speak good English, could not find jobs, So that particular job just kind of like, wow, they're not the professionals, they're not the educated, they don't speak good English. And I learned how to teach English as a second language because I had the bicultural link. So that job then led to another job where an agency was created for Koreans, Japanese, and Filipinos. And those immigrants were being ignored by the city of Oakland, and all of the quote-unquote Asian money was being given to Chinese. So that was kind of my introduction to, they completely homogenize categories that the government says, okay, you can have money, now here's the money, and don't bother us anymore. But it was like how the government looks at the categories. We're not all the same. And we all, there's so much diversity even in a category. So the Korean, Japanese, and Filipino community threatened to sue the city of Oakland. So they go, okay, we'll give you money. So this particular agency, which was what I thought was cool, was whatever Asian American studies that I had picked up, we taught Asian American studies to people who didn't speak English. We had bilingual tutors, bilingual teaching assistants, and they learned not only to find jobs, but they got trained in how to fight for unemployment, and how to deal with kind of a system that the labor market, the way they were excluding immigrants at the time was you don't have local experience. But what they really meant was you don't speak good English, who are you? You're a foreigner. And no, there's no jobs here. I would call places, because I was the training coordinator and I was also an ESL teacher. And so I would call an employer and they'd go, oh yeah, we have 3 openings. And then we'd send our students and they'd tell our students, oh, we don't have a job. So again, discrimination and lack of access was always kind of like part of the things that I would have to do. Yeah, I was an ESL teacher, but I had to be an advocate like, why did you tell me that you had 3 positions and now you're telling my students that there's no openings? This is, hello. So I found myself not only in that job, but then I had another job with Filipinos for Affirmative Action where I, this man has workers' compensation, why are you not giving him his money? And then I found myself at the county hospital going, excuse me, yes, they've been waiting 15 hours and you have to, service them. Oh, they can swim back. So discrimination and racism takes different forms. And so I've just been fortunate that I've been in a position to be able to provide access or fight for access or speak up for those who can't speak because English is a barrier or whatever the barrier is. So, and then coming here, I haven't been at the county hospital for about 9 years, but coming here, it's like being able to keep the history alive, because oh, that's really nice. That's a beautiful dance, or isn't that great? They have this kind of spirituality. Okay, fine, but people would get punished for doing that 20, 40, 60 years ago. It's like you're different. That's weird. Or, again, this thing of them and us. So at least if in this environment, in this context, we can continue to at least raise, why are we even able to showcase these cultures and traditions when before it was something like, oh, you're not American, you're not good enough, that's foreign. And at least, as you were saying at the cafe, it's better, and it is better. But there could be a moment at any time. The Boston bombings, all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's a them and us kind of situation, and all of a sudden everybody starts like defending what is American, and that's a really complicated concept right now.
The American concept,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Diversity, democracy, American.
What is American?
It's we haven't been able to dialogue enough to be able to say, well, I don't agree. Because I remember when people started using that, agree to disagree. But we can agree to disagree, but do we have to take means that are so violent and so extreme that, okay, I don't agree with you, but then you come around and it's like, oh, okay, why do we have to keep hurting each other or excluding people? We haven't come up with really ways to coexist, even though there is difference.
Yeah.
And to find models of solving the problem, dialoguing, and respecting, And it's nice that we can do the cultural things. It's nice that we can enjoy a dance or a song or a music or an instrument. But then we go back to wherever we are and go, oh, those people, I don't like their food. Or something that shows that when it comes to a serious subject, how are we going to come to some agreement? Because when my dad came in the 1920s, that was a depression. And there were so many Filipinos, and they were all young, and they were being targeted because they would date white women. There were no Filipino women here. And so they were called monkeys, and they would get beat up, and they would get physically assaulted. Some of them even died because of this, not only jealousy, but they were taking jobs away from mainstream whites, and so there was a lot of conflict and tension. So another time is that after World War II, then we started having Filipino women coming over. Families were starting to develop. But we would get mistaken again for different ethnic groups. I remember being asked, why are you so tall? And the first thought was, well, what does that mean? And Filipinos are quote unquote small. And some of the things that happened to Filipinos when they were farm workers was that they would have to use a tool, a short-handed hoe, which eventually in the 60s it was outlawed because it really was illegal to expect people to be bent over in the fields, especially farm workers. And so there was this, so it goes far deep when someone asks you, well, how come you're not a doctor? I will work at the county hospital. They go, oh, were you a doctor or were you a nurse? And some of those stereotypes comes from the fact that after 1965, when the immigration expanded to 20,000 people, the college education in the Philippines created streams of industries where you became an accountant, you became a nurse, you became a doctor, you became a teacher, and those are the kind of people that were coming over because of the third preference in the immigration law. And yet there were no jobs in the Philippines, so they had to, what they called brain drain, they had to come over to the U.S. since the U.S. and the Philippines had a special relationship. So there was a time when we were Americans, we were U.S. nationals. We were taught in the schools that, Washington, Lincoln, Emancipation Proclamation, land of opportunity. So in terms of psychologically in our mindset, we were Americans and we had rights. And then we come here, oh no, you're just monkeys. Oh no, you're savages. So another stereotype you could speak to is that in the 70s, I was working for the school district, and we started looking at textbooks, and those textbooks were saying that we were unfit to be governed, we lived in trees. So even if it wasn't a stereotype, school kids were reading like, oh, they're uncivilized, they're not fit to be quote unquote equal to us. And so it created again images of Filipinos that continue even now. And last Saturday we had a performance here at Oakland Asian Cultural Center talking about how whitening products in the Philippines are so prevalent that it's like there's something wrong with not being white. And so again, you know, they all talk about how these people, you know, and at the same time, what's the standard? We have to be lighter, to be better and smarter, and so that is still applying. And then there's also the question of language, and if you're born here, why don't you speak Tagalog? If you're from the Philippines, oh, you're fresh off the boat, you don't speak good English. And the best Filipino, whether you speak with an American accent or whether you speak the language, it's really goes back to a situation where at the turn of the 20th century, we were a colonized people, and we had to adhere to a standard that we could never adhere to because our color was not the right color, and our level of development as a country was still governed by colonization. So it's hard to kind of overcome those barriers, and at the same time, I've just been lucky that I've had the kind of community jobs that I've been doing since the 70s, and I'm still doing it. So I'm hoping that we continue the education in the community, and that the community really has a lot of knowledge and information, and that institutions should be able to give the opportunity to share that information, and especially pass it on to future generations. Peace out.
I meant do a goodbye. Not actually say peace out.
Now you know what kind of mind I have.